You know it. You tell the story.
You tell the whole damn world this is bear territory.
Are you a Golden Bear fan who loves the University of California? Are you unabashedly and unapologetically all about Cal? Well, you found the right place. Welcome to Tell the Whole Damn World and our special Cal History episode. We're the podcast that celebrates all things Cal. We hope to put a smile on your face and help you come away feeling good about your connection to the greatest university on the planet. It's Monday, June 30th, 2025. U.S. News and World Report has once again ranked UC Berkeley as the top public university in the world. And it's another great day to be a bear. Thank you so much for joining us. Have you ever wondered why Henry's is called Henry's? Why there's a street named Durant? Or why UC Berkeley is located where it is? Well, you're going to want to pull up a chair today because Leslie Mitchell and I are going to lay it all out for you and tell you all about how our beloved university came to be. Before we get to that, I want to express how much we appreciate all of you out there listening and watching. Would you be kind enough to help us grow this podcast? All you need to do is tell your closest Cal friends about it. You can tell them to go to tellthewholedamnworld.com. And while we go to the extra effort to bring you these episodes on YouTube so you can see our featured guests and see pictures from our Cal History episodes, you can always simply listen anywhere you get your podcasts. We realize all of you lead busy lives. Speaking on behalf of all of us here, including Ahmad and Leslie, thank you so much for listening and watching. We appreciate you more than you know. Hang tight, and I'll be right back with Leslie, and we'll learn all about how Cal, the university we all love so dearly, originally got started in the middle of the 19th century.
This week in Cal History.
For those of you who don't yet know, Leslie Mitchell is our resident Cal history expert. She's a third-generation Cal alum, history major, and lifelong Golden Bear fan who writes wonderfully informative articles about notable people connected with our university who have done great things in this world. You can visit her website, calbearshistory.com, or follow her on Twitter at calbearshistory to learn more about the people who have been a part of the rich history of the University of California. You hear me say this all the time, but we couldn't be more lucky to have Leslie as part of the show. Today, Leslie and I are going to talk about the very beginning of the University of California and its founding president, a Yale-educated congregational minister born way back in 1802 named Henry Durant. Welcome again to the show, Leslie.
Well, thank you, Reza, and thank you, as always, for your kind words. Before we start, I just wanted to point out that I am wearing today, in honor of Alex Morgan, I'm wearing her Cal jersey, number 13. It's her birthday coming up on July 2nd, and her number is being retired by her professional team, the San Diego Wave. So happy birthday, Alex Morgan.
Happy birthday. And hey, if you are listening or if anyone is connected to Alex Morgan, we would love to have Alex on the show. I think she'd be a wonderful.
The greatest soccer player in Cal history, bar none. Although you could argue Brandy Chastain, who was part of the 1999 team, but she transferred after 2 years at Cal. So, you know.
Exactly.
Does that count? We don't. That's the question today. Does that count anymore? Who knows?
First off, I just got to say that you did an amazing job doing all this research into Henry Durant and the very beginnings of the university. And I guess just recently, like a couple of days ago, got this 600-page book. Do you want to show people that book? Do you have it handy? Yeah, that looks like a thick tome, to be sure. And just chock full of all kinds of interesting stories and things that I guess we'll talk about here today. But
for people who are just listening, it's called the University of California, 1968, and it's by a guy named Vern Statman, and it was put out by the university for the centennial of the university in 1968.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I got to say, just in reading everything that you put together, I was just like, wow. I mean, there's so many great little nuggets of history there about how everything came to be for the university. I think that, and you hear these names of people that, we hear all the time, like Durant Avenue, Henry's, and Durant Hotel. Like, oh, wait a minute. There's actually a person who's connected to that. There was somebody, some historical significance
Well,
there
yeah, and
that.
his picture, at Henry's, they have his picture up there, and that's actually Henry Durant. I guess you can't copyright that since he's been dead for 150 years.
Right. I read through everything that you'd written and all the different links that you sent me, and there's just so much stuff. So I'm glad that we do have a special episode today to be able to talk about all this, because there's just a lot that we'll have to cover. So Henry Durant in particular, born in 1802, educated at Yale, congregational minister. The thing that I guess surprised me at the very beginning of all this is that he traveled out west to come here at the age of 51, right? He was in his early 50s making that trek. And there
And it was
was.
it was in 1853, so just a couple of years after the gold rush started. So it was still pretty. It was a rugged trip.
Right. And so there's no railroad that connects the east and west at that point in time, and had to travel by boat down to Panama, and right, and had to cross over
That
Panama, the no Panama Canal.
he actually, I believe he actually went around Cape Horn, which was a very treacherous trip all the way around the tip of South America.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's even more impressive and hard to imagine at that time, to go all the way around down there, because that's apparently very treacherous water.
Apparently, from what I've read, yeah, a lot of people did not make it on that trip.
Right. But he did this at the age of 51, which is not, you're not a spring chicken. I mean, I'm 53, but
And
that's good.
you are a spring chicken if I ever. No, particularly
Yeah,
back then. I mean, people didn't live much. Most people didn't live much past 60. Mid to late 60s. So that was not a young man back then.
sure, sure. But he made the trek all the way to San Francisco, and then, yeah, from what I understand, and here's the thing that really gets interesting, is this is back in the early 1850s, and buys some land in Oakland. And I guess it all started as the Contra Costa Academy, right?
Well,
That
it
was the
all
name of it.
started actually a little bit earlier.
Oh,
There was this other fella named Samuel Willie, who was a 49er. He not a San Francisco 49er, but a Gold Rush 49er. He came in 1849, and he did the Isthmus of Panama with the yellow fever and the malaria, and you don't know, you get off on one side, you cross to the other, and then you don't know if the boat's waiting for you to take you the rest of the way.
wow.
And he was 24 years old, and he came for the purpose of founding a church and hopefully spreading some education as well in California, rather than being a gold miner, which you would think a 24-year-old guy in 1849 making that trip, oh, sure, he's going to go to the gold mines. And no, he stopped in Monterey and then into San Jose, and he wanted to found a church. There weren't enough people of his denomination to found a church. He said everybody went to the gold mines except the women, and they were all Catholics, so they didn't want to go to my church.
But I mean, this is an era, like you just said, where, I mean, the population was at least 75% men. There was really little to no interest in furthering your education by,
Well, yeah,
vast majority of people, it
Samuel
seems.
Willie tried to start a college. There weren't even any schools. I think I read there were about a dozen schools of any description in California, in the entire state of California at that time in 1849, 1850. And Willie decided, well, I'm going to start a college. I don't know who his target market for college education was. All the young men were off in the gold mines as fast as
Well,
they could get there.
yeah, and didn't you tell me offline that there were actually only two high schools in the entire state of California? One in San
But that
Francisco,
was
one in
that was
Sacramento,
by
or
1860. So that was like 11
even
years
later.
later, there was a high school in San Francisco and one in Sacramento, and that was it.
Right.
But
So this
yeah,
is really
so
like the Wild West. I mean, saloons and I guess some sense of law and order, but
no sense of law and order. This was the era when San Francisco had the vigilante committees, very famously,
whoa.
hanging people who got out of line. So yeah, there was really no law and order.
Wow. Yeah. And so from all of that, thanks to Willie and Durant, and they came with ideas of spreading education, and you have 75% of the population being men.
And
You
mostly
don't
very
have a lot of
young men.
families.
Young men came
Right. And you
predominantly.
don't you
So
don't
they're
have a
not
lot of
people with families, right?
right, no families, so you're not thinking about education. And so from all of that sprang the greatest university on the planet. That's amazing to me to think. So
Well, you got to dream big. Yeah, according to what I've read, Willie came first, and he was trying his best to start a college, and it wasn't going anywhere because nobody was interested. But then a few years later, Henry Durant showed up and literally knocked on his door with a letter of introduction saying, "I hear that you're interested in education, and I'd like to start a school." And the benefit for Henry Durant was he actually was a teacher. He was a Latin and Greek scholar, and he had been teaching in Massachusetts. So he had actual experience. And Willie said that it was just like a bolt from the blue that this guy shows up and he's like, "So good, somebody else actually wants to do this thing." So they finally decided, they looked around, they considered a lot of different locations, and then they came up with this land in Oakland that you were talking about.
right, and this was around 5th and Broadway, is that
Well,
right? That's
the original, and I love that this is the origin of the University of California, is it was an empty, unused dance hall / boarding house, 5th and Broadway in Oakland, that they rented as the first place where they opened their school. So that's
wow.
that's where the University of California, if you take it back far enough, that's where
I
we
mean,
started.
I got to go over there and just see him. Is there a plaque or anything got to commemorate that?
Not there. That's when they were still what they originally called themselves the Contra Costa Academy, and they weren't a college at that point. They were basically like a high school with by the way, 3 students when they opened their doors.
Yeah, 3 students.
So they called
Wow.
themselves Contra Costa Academy. The only teacher was Durant. Willie was the business guy who was trying to get the money and trying to get donors interested in sponsoring it. There was a lot of trouble getting donations because they would send people back east to try to drum up interest. And everybody said, yeah, all these things out west, they always fail. We've given money before and they always fail. And we're tired of giving money. And we got our own issues. Plus, about the time that they were trying to drum up a lot of money, the Civil War was looming, and people had a lot of other things on their mind. So, they rented this place in Oakland. They got going as the Contra Costa Academy in 1853. 2 years later, they got big ideas, and they got a charter from the state, which you had to do at that time to call yourself a college, and they called themselves the College of California. But they were still basically just a high school. They didn't have any college level courses. They didn't really open their doors yet as a college. But that's when they also moved to their more permanent location in Oakland, which was
downtown Oakland, right between 12th and 14th Street
and Harrison and Franklin.
Right. I mean, that's almost smack dab right there in the middle of downtown, and there's like a 4-block area of downtown.
Right. There's an orchard. Apparently, there was a Jewish cemetery on one side. There was an orchard on one side. If you look at the pictures of it, it looks pretty it almost looks like a farm or certainly a small town. Well, it was a small town. In fact, they didn't have a census of Oakland for 1850 because the first U.S. census in California was 1860. But judging by the number of registered voters in Oakland, in 1855, there were 75 registered voters. So it was pretty darn small.
75. Oh my goodness. I mean, that is just a completely different era. I mean, I can only
It,
imagine.
it really is. Yes. And by the way, there is a plaque there for the Franklin and Harrison location. I think it was a very early number, the 45th California state. You know those plaques that they have up, say state historical marker,
Right.
that gives the whole, the little recitation that this was the original spot of the University of California, etc. So it was four blocks, and by 1860 when they opened, they had 20 students. So they had, when they opened as the College of California, they finally got their act together and they raised the money, because money was a constant problem. As you
Well,
can
yeah,
imagine, starting with 3 students, that's not a lot of tuition.
you're right. Well, I love what you wrote. I mean, from the research that you did, it sounded like, poor old Henry Durant would, when he walked the streets of Oakland, he would be chased by creditors demanding money.
Yeah,
So,
it was rough. Well, and also, from what I've read, it seems like Henry Durant was not that concerned about the money situation. He seems like almost like a Silicon Valley prototype of like, just do it. Just do something and see what happens. And he would buy things. Apparently, at one point, he bought a bell for the big main building on campus. And then it was going to get repossessed, and all the students had to chip in money to prevent the bell from getting repossessed. He would just buy things, or he would, start something, or, so, well, let's have this program, or let's have that class, or whatever. And he didn't worry about the details, like, how are you going to pay for this, and how is this going to work? That was up to
right.
Willie, who was the guy saying, "Now, wait a minute, Henry."
That's funny. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you kind of need somebody to just be the dreamer to just kind of make things happen, even if you don't have everything, all set to hit go. You just kind of need to try your best to do it in little pieces, I guess, at a time. But
That's it. That's exactly one of the books I was reading on this said, you know, for all that he was sort of a little bit irresponsible and a dreamer and just did stuff without thinking, if you hadn't had that, the university never would have gotten started. Because if you were going to be logical about it, you wouldn't have thought of trying to start a college in California in
no,
1853. You just wouldn't have thought about it.
not at all. Not at all.
I mean, with 2 high
So,
schools in the whole state, what's your target market? Where are you going to get your students?
right, right. So, yeah, right around that time, then, like you said, like 1860, you had high school then in San Francisco and in Sacramento. But I mean,
Right.
still, just to only have 2 high schools at that time for the entire state of California. I mean, it just is incredible again to me. Just
Well, and there weren't that many children proportionately, because again,
right,
they were mostly the population was largely made up of young men,
right,
so that there weren't a lot of families. But that fairly soon started to change. I mean, by the 1870s, I think it was a third of the population was women, so it was getting there, and you're starting to get more families.
sure,
But so yeah,
sure,
they opened up. They taught all. It was a very strongly liberal arts, primarily the classics. They were big on Latin and Greek. That was Henry Durant's field. In fact, there was a big battle in the College of California among the trustees, because they originally were going to make French and Spanish mandatory classes for beginning in the freshman year, and the stodgy old people said, no, Latin and Greek, if you don't need anything else, why are you wasting your time on these modern languages? Forget the modern languages, Latin and Greek. So it's a whole different world.
Latin and Greek. Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense. All kinds of
Well,
people
that
speaking Latin and Greek
they
these
were
days.
Yale people. They were Ivy League people from the early 1800s, and that's how things were. So that's, and that was always a big issue. And throughout the beginnings of well, let's face it, still a big issue today. Things never change. Is, how much liberal arts stuff do you have versus how much job training, basically practical
Right,
stuff, do you have?
right,
And the College of California was pretty much strictly liberal arts. I mean, they had mathematics, which is as close as they came to practical. They had algebra and geometry and that sort of thing, but they didn't have any kind of sciences really.
sure. So then things began to change, and I guess with the Morrill Act, right, in 1862, that was kind of the big change where the
Right. That was a
federal
federal
land
law.
grants and all of that. And
But that was a federal law that created the land grant colleges, giving the states like big chunks of federal lands that they could use strictly for the purpose of founding higher education. It's going to say universities, but really they specified it had to be agricultural and mechanical. Mechanical, not meaning you're going to fix people's cars, mostly because they didn't have cars, but mechanical in terms of meaning sort of more broadly scientific, hands-on engineering, mining,
sure,
that sort of thing.
right, right,
Applied science. A lot of universities, including Cal, offer these kinds of classes now, but they were definitely not the theoretical research kind of stuff. They were
right,
the hands-on kind
right.
of stuff, which makes sense on a frontier society that you're not going to have a lot of physicists.
Sure. Not in that era. And then so the big areas of land, I understand California had 150,000 acres that they had available. The thing, of course, is that these wide areas of land were, of course, just taken from the Native Americans,
Right.
which is an issue still to
Yeah,
this
there's a
day,
lot of
of course.
controversy over that, and a lot of to this day, because in a lot of
Sure.
places they just took whole
They just
swaths of
took it.
territory
Right.
away from the Native Americans and said,
Right.
"Here, now it's federal land, and now we're giving it to California, and you can sell it off for development,"
Right.
which
Right.
is not really very nice or
No.
fair to the Native peoples whose land it was.
Exactly.
And California, they again, the land was not like when I first heard land grant colleges, I always understood it was like they gave you a chunk of land and that's where you built your school. But it wasn't like that at all. They just said, here, have a bunch of land. And they basically, in California anyway, they let the state pick whatever land they wanted to pick. And
Oh.
then California raised apparently like 5 times as much money an acre as the other states, because they came up with this idea of, well, we'll ask people, what land would you like to buy? And then we'll say to the federal government, okay, this guy's willing to pay a lot of money for this chunk of land. We'd like that chunk of land. And so they sort of reversed engineered it. Instead of getting the land first, they got the buyers first, and then they picked the land that they
Yeah.
wanted.
Well, good, smart idea, at least to
Yeah, they got like
maximize how much money you get.
$6 an acre, where the average for the other states was $1.50 an acre that they
Wow.
managed to get.
So even in that era, the price for land out here was a lot more than elsewhere in the United States.
Well, it was. I think it was more that they were cagey about how they selected the land to sell. They sold it, So they had somebody wanted it right next to a railroad, or they had somebody that wanted it right next to a particular town or whatever. So anyway, California sold off all this land, got a big pile of money. They passed a law. They were required by the Morrill Act. They were required to pass a law no later than 1866 establishing a university, or I should say a college, a school, an agricultural and mechanical school. So California legislature duly passed a law in 1866 saying, okay, we're starting an agricultural and mechanical and mining school, and then didn't do anything. There was no actual school founded.
Ah, so I guess help me understand this. I understand there was a senator, Senator Dwinell, for Dwinell Hall, right? Or,
Yes,
later named
yes.
Dwinell Hall.
Not at the time. Dwinell Hall came a little later, but
Right.
yes, that is
Gotta have that backwards,
Dwinell
right?
Hall is named.
But he was the one who kind of sponsored this the Organic Act.
Right. Well, what happened was the state, in compliance with the Morrill Act, passed this law saying, okay, we're going to have this agricultural, mechanical, and mining school in 1866. And then they didn't do anything with it because everybody was arguing about, well, what are we going to do? And there weren't any trained people to run it. There wasn't any faculty. How is this going to work? Where are we going to put it? All the politics that we all know about. Meanwhile, the College of California had tried to get in on it originally. As Henry Durant went to the legislature and said, well, you could, like, we bought, by the way, by this time they had bought some land in Berkeley. because they weren't like that excited with the Oakland land, because it was, even though there's only 75 registered voters in Oakland, they thought that was way too urban and it was
So
distracting.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. I don't know if you would know either, because I mean, it seems like they were broke all the time. Like, how do you cobble together enough money,
They came
to
up with this creative financing, which worked out as well as those things tend to work out. They did it. They got a loan to buy this land, 160 acres, that was located between the North Fork and the South Fork of Strawberry Creek in Berkeley. And then they also had they got a bunch of land that was south of Strawberry Creek, which is now where like Sproul Plaza and Haas Pavilion and the track stadium and all that is. And so that land they were going to parcel up and sell in little like lots, 120 lots they were going to sell to people for development. So, and they were going to take that money they were going to make off of that, and that's how they were going to pay for the land and then finance putting some buildings up. Unfortunately, at that point, California went through its first ever economic bust, the post-gold rush bust. I guess the euphoria of the gold rush wore off a little bit, and so they were left with nobody wanted to buy the land, or not very many people wanted to buy the land. This sounds familiar. And so they were dead broke by that time. But they came up with another creative plan, which was water was at a premium in the East Bay at that time. And they had this creek. So they dammed up part of Strawberry Creek, and that was, by the way, why they picked that location, is because it had access to water. Never think of Strawberry Creek as being like, oh, that's the water source for.
That's right.
For the university.
Yeah, there was no other source of water. I mean, that is such a critical part of it, and so amazing to me to think that. So this 160-acre plot of land, is just frames beautifully Strawberry Creek, because that was the defining feature. That's what you needed more than anything else, really. But it's because of Strawberry Creek that the University of California is where it is today. That's
Yes.
pretty cool to me.
So they dammed up a portion of one of the forks of Strawberry Creek and made a little reservoir, and then they were going to sell the water to other people in Berkeley and then and also in North Oakland, which they did. They actually founded a separate company called the College Water Company. Creative name. Yeah, but of course, none of this is really very much related to running a college or a university. So it was all getting a little bit crazy, and they didn't make enough money. They made money on the water, but not enough. I guess enough to kind of keep them going, but not enough to really pay off their debt. And the interest starts accumulating on the debt, and it starts ballooning. And they owe like $100,000, and they have no way to pay it off. One thing also that we didn't mention was, when they first bought the land in 1860, and they came out, the whole board of trustees, I believe there were 12 members of the board of trustees, and they came out to take a look at it. And they went to the highest point on their land, which was a rock outcropping, which is now at the corner of Hearst and Gailey, now is called Founders Rock. So they went up to this elevation, a little elevated rock outcropping, and to take a look at the land. And one of the trustees was a man named Frederick Billings. And the story that is told is that he was looking out at the Golden Gate, and there were ships sailing out of it to the west. And he thought of this poem that he recited that was written by an Anglo-Irish bishop called George Berkeley, which in American English is pronounced Berkeley. And the poem begins with the words, "Westward the course of empire." And they all thought, yeah, that sounds great. Let's call it Berkeley after this bishop, which of course has also become a controversy in recent years, since Bishop Berkeley was a slave owner and advocated that slavery was a good thing because it allowed people to be converted to Christianity, which is all very horrifying. But, history is what it is. So anyway, that's where the name Berkeley, that in 1860, the trustees of the College of California came up with that as the name for the city. Or it wasn't a city then, obviously, but for the area.
Right. And I mean, it is like such a rural area. I mean, it's, to hear what you tell me about Oakland, I mean, they wanted to get out of Oakland because they considered it too urban, and it, didn't sound like it was that urban, but you go out to the rural area of Berkeley where there's nothing but fields apparently. And I think you even mentioned offline that, if any professors, people who could instruct or teach students at that time, like where would they live? Right? I mean, there's nothing.
Housing
nothing
problems in Berkeley have always existed, as we know, but they were a completely different kind of housing problem then, because basically there weren't any buildings. It was
no structures.
It wasn't that it was too expensive; it's just there weren't any buildings. So a lot of them stayed in Oakland, and once they moved to Berkeley, which was of course a little bit later, the regents organized a horse trolley to go to Oakland and pick them up and bring them. And when the first couple of buildings were built, some of them actually rented out little spaces to live on the top floor of North Hall, which was the second building on campus, it's just hard to wrap your head around. But there literally was no place else to live.
Well, that's funny. Just the idea of this transport that would go back and forth between Oakland and Berkeley kind of reminds me of like the Humphrey Go-Bart.
Yes.
The predecessor, the very first, right?
Yeah, and it went on the only road. There was only one road apparently that went all the way to the campus from Oakland, and that, of course, is now Telegraph Avenue.
Right.
So so this sort of converged. You had this land in Berkeley, which was a great spot. Everybody agreed it was a really ideal spot for a campus. The state liked it. They came out, they looked at several places to locate their college, their agricultural mechanical college. And this was the spot that they liked. And then but they had no knowledge or expertise in running a school. Then you had Henry Durant, who had knowledge he was, an experienced teacher. They had some other experienced teachers. They had experience running a school. So it was sort of like, well, yeah, let's do this thing.
Right.
And they joined up, and there was a lot of negotiations in the legislature. Again, there was this big fight because a lot of folks in the legislature and in the community wanted it to be strictly an agricultural and mechanical school. All this liberal arts stuff, all these languages and history and literature, that's a complete waste of time. Let's forget about that. The battle goes on that issue to this day.
And it was thanks to Henry Durant in particular, right, who kind of put his foot down or successfully negotiated that, we do provide a real true liberal arts education, and that's really why the university became a true university.
Yeah, I mean, today we in the United States anyway, we use college and university pretty much interchangeably. Unlike my British friends, who a university is something very different from a college. College is basically a glorified high school or a trade school. We use them interchangeably, but they really were very different things. And a college, particularly, was more liberal artsy, and a university was universal. It was supposed to teach everything. So yes, you would have your sciences. Yes, you would have your engineering and your mining, but you would also have literature and languages and Greek and Latin and all that good stuff too. So that's how it was finally decided that it was going to work that way. And that's where John Dwinell came in. He was really, he met with Durant and Willie and a couple of other people, and they were kind of made a committee to come up with how is this bill going to work? Because the nature of what the university would be was going to be decided by the legislature. Were they going to indeed expand their mining school basically into a university? And Dwinell got it through the legislature. He deserves a building, maybe not that building.
Yeah, maybe not as confusing of a building to walk into, but
but I gotta say, everybody knows that building, though. Nobody
right.
forgets it. So yes, they finally passed what they called the Organic Act in 1868, and it was signed by the Governor Henry Haight. Yes, Haight of Haight Street in San Francisco, same guy.
Ah,
And he signed it on March 23rd, 1868, which is why March 23rd is Charter Day for the
Charter Day.
university as our birthday. However, they didn't get started for another almost year and a half as the University of California. It took some time to get. There were those who were saying, "Okay, you signed this in March. Let's open the doors of the university in September of 1868 and start admitting students." But again, there was still this battle about who was going to actually be running things, who was in charge, who were going to be the new regents. Was it just going to take over all the trustees of the College of California, or were they going to have new people? And of course, there was all the political stuff in
Well, and
Sacramento.
even some of the things you mentioned about like how to actually build the buildings and the structures on campus, right? I
Well,
mean,
they knew they were going to start in Oakland
uh,
because they took over the existing campus of the
sure,
College of California, became the original University of California. So, because there was no land in Berkeley, there was no buildings in Berkeley. There was
no
this nice
buildings,
land, but no buildings. So that they knew that was they couldn't open there right away. That they had to wait for the buildings to get built.
right? So like
So
the first class for Cal, 24 students, I guess, who were in that very first class, technically for the University of California, they really did all of their studying in Oakland, but then
right,
they graduated on the Berkeley campus, which apparently was the very first event that was held on campus
right.
in 1873,
July of
right?
1873, and only 12 of those 24 actually graduated,
Right,
who were
right.
given
The
the
12,
nickname the 12 Apostles. Yeah.
12 apostles,
I
right?
wonder if
Right.
if today you said that, people would get mad because they think it was sacrilegious or something. But they were cool with it in those days. So yeah, they started in Oakland, and that was always the plan. But the question is, when are you going to start actually having university classes as opposed to College of California classes? And should the College of California keep going for another year? And what happens to those students? And eventually that's what happened. They kept going for another year. And by the way, in the law, in the Organic Act, the alumni of the College of California by law became alumni of the University of California, which is a little weird. So there's one guy in particular, Charles Wetmore, who became a sort of a celebrity winemaker. He's called the father of winemaking in California. He was a graduate from the College of California, but he gets claimed by the university because he's adopted by law.
Ah, I see.
And his
And
younger brother, whose name was Clarence Wetmore, was actually the very first student to enroll at the university. And Clarence and Charles jointly started the wine industry in California.
that's very interesting. Very cool.
So, yeah, they started in Oakland. And again, there was all sorts of infighting over building. Okay, we're up and running in Oakland. We're now calling ourselves the University of California. Hiring professors was apparently a real struggle. They trying to find qualified people. Again, California was still so early days, and there were so
Right.
few well-educated people.
Well, the thing that I think the life lesson almost to be learned from all of this is that, if you have a vision for something, some people may tend to just kind of wait and want to have all of their ducks in a row and make sure everything is all set. But life really doesn't work that way. You kind of build it in pieces. It all eventually comes together, right? And this is like a perfect example of that. As time passes, and then you have the intercontinental railway that made it easier for people to travel from the east to the west and back and forth. All of a sudden, all these things become easier too. But you have to start somewhere, and like if you build it, they will come, right?
I've heard that saying somewhere.
So fascinating.
Yeah,
I wanted to say,
it was all kind of slapdash. They didn't have a president when they started out. And by the way, I didn't mention this, but the College of California itself never had a president. They had Henry Durant was in charge of all of the academic stuff. And they had a vice president who was Samuel Willey, basically did all the business side of it, all that kind of work. But they never got a president because they kept offering it to people, and the people would say, well, yeah, but you guys are broke. And if I take that job, I'll never get paid. In fact, Henry Durant was always saying, I don't know if I can stay here much longer because I don't ever get paid and I can't live like this.
A true labor of love.
Yeah, he did stay. Yes, he did. So they didn't have an existing president. So then when the University of California gets started, there's no president in place, and they're like, well, who should we hire as president? And the regents, this just blew my mind. I found this in this book that I just got today about the history of the University of California. They voted, the regents, and the first person they actually elected this person without telling him. They elected him to be the president of the University of California, George McClellan, who, if you know American history at all, was a Civil War general who was a failed Civil War general who got fired twice by Abraham Lincoln because he wouldn't fight and he was grossly insubordinate.
And he didn't have anything to do with education.
He had no experience in teaching or education or running a school or running anything other than the military. And why they came up with him, I don't know. But fortunately for all concerned, he said, no, I'm not interested in doing that. So they had to go back to the drawing board. So then they came up with a guy named Daniel Coit Gilman of Gilman Hall, who had been a trustee of the College of California, but had since gone back east to teach. And he said no. They didn't ask him. They just elected him. And he said, no, I can't. He had little kids and his wife had just died. And he said, I can't come out and do that. So their third choice was Henry Durant, who was like, I'm right here. I've been here the whole time.
Good old Henry Durant. I mean, so he was technically the founding president of the University of California, the very first one.
He was.
And I thought it was very interesting later on talking about how apparently in this era, people would just elect people without them even, running for it officially. But later on, he was elected mayor of Oakland, right? And he didn't run for it. They just elected him and made him mayor of Oakland.
Right. That was after he retired from the university. And he was like, well, okay, I guess I'm mayor of Oakland now. Yes.
Yeah, so incredible.
So he's the president, but they're still having this trouble getting the buildings built in Berkeley. And the university started classes in Oakland in 1869. They didn't move to Berkeley until the fall of 1873 for classes. So that's 4 years. That's a long time to get. And as I think most people know, there originally were only two buildings on campus, North Hall and South Hall. Or I should say South Hall and North Hall, because South Hall was the first. It's like, why did it take 4 years to get a building built? And when they moved in 1873, North Hall still wasn't even finished yet. So it's like, what were they doing? Well, what they were doing was fighting first, because they had like 3 different committees of the Board of Regents that claimed jurisdiction over planning the buildings. And you know how that goes. Everybody was fighting over power and squabbling over who's got the authority over this and that. And there was a big debate. Should we build in brick? Should we build in wood? Should we build in stone? And everybody had their opinion. And what architect should we use? And what plan should we use? And I don't like that one. No, I don't like that one. Where exactly should the buildings be? And they just squabbled about it for endlessly, for like well over a year before they even decided what they were going to do.
But, Leslie, why does this not surprise me? It's, how is this really anything different than the bureaucracy that we see all the time when it comes to the university?
Finally, even the regents got tired of it, and they appointed a 3-person executive committee and said, just decide. We can't keep doing this. We'll never get anything done.
Make a decision. Go with it.
So they decided to build in brick, and then they decided to build South Hall as their first building. And unfortunately, it was a lot more expensive than they expected. And it was half built in 1871, and they ran out of money. And so they had to stop work. So it just sat there for well over a year, half built. And they were trying to get more money. This also never changes. They were trying to get more money out of the state. And the state said, no, we gave you all that land. You're responsible. You figure it out. We're not giving you any more money. And so, it went round and round. There was still land left to be sold. So they managed to to sell off some more land eventually and raise the money to get it sold, or to get it built. But
That
meanwhile,
is too funny.
North Hall was built out of wood because building out of wood was cheaper and quicker. And they realized, well, we have this lovely plan for these brick buildings, but we got to get this second building built. So they just went with the quickest, cheapest option they could find, which is also why North Hall no longer exists, because it was eventually deemed a fire hazard because it was made of wood, and it was torn down in the 1920s.
Right.
But South Hall stands, so yay South Hall.
Yay, South Hall. Absolutely.
So it finally got finished in 1873.
And they had their very first event there with the graduation of the very first 12 apostles, like you mentioned, who graduated in that first graduating class.
Right. And they were a very distinguished group. I think there was a governor, Jim Budd, who became governor of California. There were 3 people who became regents of the university. There were people who became a mayor. There was lawyers and I did all sorts of business people and what have you. They all were pretty distinguished. One of them was also a math professor at Cal. His name was George Edwards. And he also coached the athletic teams and they named Edwards Field after him.
Nice. That's
he taught at Cal until the 1930s when he passed away.
Wow. See, now that is pretty cool, right? From the first graduating class to go on and to then have the track and field stadium named after you.
I love the whole idea that there's a track stadium named after a math professor.
Right.
That's so Berkeley.
Right. And then a couple other little notes, I guess. After Henry Durant stepped down as the president of the university, his successor was Daniel Coit Gilman. And of course, I've heard the name growing up here in the Bay Area, Gilman, all the time, most because of Gilman Street, and always wondered where that name came from.
Well, there's Gilman Hall on campus as well.
Gilman Hall. So it's amazing to me. When I read through all of the research that you've done on this, to hear all of these names, Dwinell and Durant and Gilman, and I guess Willie doesn't have anything named after him that I'm aware of. But,
I don't think so. He actually, he was not. His involvement kind of ended with the College of California.
Oh, I see.
So he really didn't carry over. He was particularly apparently quite miffed that he got booted off the board, because the governor was like, a lot of the trustees of the College of California, they kind of assumed, oh, well, we're going to take over. We're going to be running the new university. And the governor said, no, you're not.
I see.
Apparently he's quoted as saying something like, these fellows think that they're going to have a lot to do with running this new organization, but they're not.
Wow.
And I think they only kept 2 trustees from the College of California that carried over to the university. Apparently, Samuel Willie was particularly shocked because the original group, the College of California, they'd basically all been ministers or very religious, sort of evangelical Protestant types. And he was shocked that not only did they allow a Catholic on the original Board of Regents, but they allowed a Jew on the original Board of Regents, and worse still, they allowed religious skeptics on the Board of Regents. So he thought the whole place was going to hell, So I guess he wasn't making friends with to get his name on a building.
I guess so. But I mean, it's so cool to me, we talk about this podcast kind of celebrating the people who are passionate about the University of California. I mean, the people who actually made it the University of California, who went to all that work to actually build it from nothing, right? I think about the passion that they've had and not getting paid. They're being broke,
having people follow them around the streets of Oakland saying, where's my money?
Right. I mean, man. And I also have to say, it was interesting to me to see from the very beginning how it started off basically as the Contra Costa Academy, and then the College of California, and then ultimately the University of California. But I am so glad that at no point were we like the San Jose Normal School that eventually became UCLA. We talked
Well,
about it in
the
the previous
UCLA started
episode.
as the southern branch of the San Jose Normal School. Yes.
Southern branch of the San Jose Normal School, right? And also, at no point in time were we ever a junior university.
No,
So
we've always been a real university
here's
ever
to
since the
that.
day we started. And as I think I mentioned to you before we went on, I'm also glad that we never had an embarrassing school nickname like a certain junior university had, and we had to change our nickname.
Right.
Because
Right.
we can always been and will always be proud Golden Bears.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Leslie. I think this is so much fun to learn about all of this stuff, and I hope our audience appreciates it too. So many good things to learn about the people for whom these buildings and streets are named after. That they actually were living, breathing people, and all the work that they did to contribute to the greatest university on the planet.
Well, I don't think I could say anything better than that, except go Bears.
Go Bears! Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you.
Wasn't that cool? So much good stuff that I never knew before. I admit I never was a big fan of history until doing this podcast, and now I can't get enough of it, especially when it's about Cal history. And maybe, just maybe, it has a little something to do with Leslie Mitchell, too. This podcast is entirely a labor of love and a reflection of how much we love our university. Please help us grow this podcast by telling the whole damn world about us. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Tell the Whole Damn World. And you can follow us on X and Blue Sky at Win4Cal. That's Win, the number 4, Cal. Share us with all your Cal friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate all of you out there listening and watching. See you next Monday. This podcast is about celebrating all things Cal and the prominent people who are passionate about the University of California. Do you feel Cal is the center of the universe? Do you bleed blue and gold? We want you to tell the whole damn world about it. Go Bears!